Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. Hey guys, Dr. Chaffee here. Just wanted to do a talk on what I basically did at KetoCon, so the why we are carnivores, but I wanted to do it with the slides that were prepared for that talk, but unfortunately didn't show up in the video recording that we had. So I'll be doing roughly the same talk, covering the same material. It's not going to be word for word. It's not going to be exactly the same because it is sort of 6 weeks separate, but I'll be covering the same sort of material and maybe adding in a bit extra as well and going through the slides. So yeah, that's it, and you check it out. And if you like this sort of thing, please do like and subscribe. It really does help get the message out. And so hit the little bell and subscribe, and then you'll get all the content that I have. And I put out videos multiple times a week, and I have more content coming out on Patreon as well, and things will be coming out like this earlier, and other bonus content that isn't available elsewhere, as well as weekly Zoom meetings and Ask Me Anything sort of sessions and live Q&As as well. So if you want to be a part of that, please do check that out and think about becoming a patron. Okay, thanks guys, here we go. Okay, so the topic of my conversation is why we are carnivores, and just the arguments and evidence behind the fact that biologically humans are carnivores, and what this means and why it matters. So first, we should really define our terms. So, what is a carnivore? What is an herbivore? What is an omnivore? Herbivore is just something that just eats only plants. Pretty straightforward. A carnivore is something that eats almost only meat, and an omnivore is something that eats both plants and meat. But I don't think that's a very tight definition, because felines are known as obligate carnivores because almost every plant will kill them or cause serious harm. And yet they can eat some plants, and domestic cats are fed grain and plant-based kibble, which is obviously showing that they can survive on some plant food as well. So does that make them an omnivore? I don't think so. I think what we need to define here is what is optimal for the animal, what is best for them to eat and survive on in the wild. We can also think of omnivore in another way. I think the really only good working functional definitions of the word omnivore would be one of two things. So either you get as much nutrition out of both plants and animals, you can eat them indiscriminately, or there are things that you can only get in plants that you have to have, and there are things that don't exist in meat, and there are things in meat that you have to have that don't exist in plants. And so you necessarily have to eat both. So humans don't fall into either of those categories. So we have things in meat that we have to have that we cannot get from plants, but there is nothing in plants or fungus that we have to have that we cannot get from meat. Now, it is true that if you eat different things, you will change what your body's requirements for different nutrients are. And this is where the RDAs come from. But these are looking at the context of eating in a mixed diet. So things are very different when you are exclusively eating meat. So, the evidence for this is, I mean, there's just a ton of evidence, and we can go through these in different ways, looking at things biologically, anatomically, evolutionarily, anthropologically, metabolically, and the fact that plants, are living things, and they like to stay living things. If you eat them, they die, and so all living things have a defense. While animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they use poison and other mechanisms as a way to deter animals and insects from eating them. But poison being a main issue there. So, why is this important? Well, it's important because when we're talking about living optimally, you have to be able to eat the optimal nutrition. And if meat provides optimal nutrition and plants can cause harm through their defense chemicals, this is obviously not optimal to be a so-called omnivore. And where this really plays in is in medicine and our concept of chronic diseases, which I argue are not diseases per se. These are toxicities and malnutrition, really. So toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition, right? So namely, too many plants, not enough animal protein and fat. Okay, so you can look at this as as simply as looking at animals in the zoo. Animals in the zoo, if you have signs that say don't feed the animals, if you feed these animals something they don't eat, they get sick. And any proper zookeeper that knows what they're doing can tell you that if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, that they get sick. But what do they get sick with? They get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, all arthritis, and all the rest of them. These things don't exist in the wild, and they don't exist in animals that eat their optimal, appropriately specific, biologically adapted diet. Dogs and cats are known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble because it's cheap and it's a filler, and they get sick too, and they get all these same diseases. We get all these same diseases. And in fact, that's what veterinarians are saying. They're showing that animals and domestic animals are having a much higher rate of so-called human diseases. They're getting all the diseases that we are getting, like diabetes, like cancer, and that this is something that has been increasing dramatically. And you can make different arguments, but it correlates perfectly with the advent of packaged dog food becoming the main way of feeding animals, and these diseases started rising precipitously, and the average life expectancy dropped precipitously. The average life expectancy of a golden retriever in America in the 1970s was 17 years. Now it's 9 years. Some people might say this is because of aggressive breeding programs, but a golden retriever was already a pure breed. I don't see how just making more of them is going to cut their life expectancy in half without causing any major problems in other directions. So biologically, we can look at this at a number of different ways, but we can start from our teeth. Our teeth have changed dramatically in the last sort of 8 million years, becoming smaller and smaller because we're chewing softer and softer foods. We're not chewing on sticks all day like a gorilla does, and so we're getting carnivorous adaptations to our teeth and our brains. Our brains are growing bigger because we can support a bigger brain, and we also need a bigger brain to figure out how to get animal source protein and nutrition. And that's very simple because we cannot take down a mastodon with our bare hands. We're not going to take down an elk with our bare hands, and we're not going to be able to rip it up and eat it as well. And that's why we had to develop tools and tactics, and that's why our brains grew instead of our claws and our teeth. And so that's why we live in houses and lions don't. That's why we developed our intelligence, and chimpanzees and gorillas didn't. So to the extent that we have anyway, because they actually are pretty smart animals. But then just looking at the GI tract, you go down to our stomach pH is very, very low. It's around 1.4, 1.5. And other carnivores are around like 2, like lions are usually around 2. You look at buzzards and vultures and carrion animals, they're around the 1.4, 1.5 range. And that's because they have the food that they're eating has a high bacterial load. And so they need to be able to kill off that bacteria so they don't get sick. we in our evolutionary past seem to have come from a scavenger background where we were just eating off the remains of the kills that another more physically adapted animal uh, would have made a kill and then left some leavings. And this is actually where the original stone tools came from, using big, large pound stones to crack open the skulls of these animals and get at the brains, because this was very nutritious, very high calorie and fat content that was very, very good for our early ancestors, and any animal for that matter. But that's what we had to adapt. We had to adapt that high stomach pH. It's simply because we had to eat meat that had a lot of bacterial load. This even more recently, without refrigeration, people would be eating meat. They'd try to store and dry meat, but things would go off, things would go bad, and you'd have to be able to contend with that high bacterial load. Then you look at the fact that we have 5 organs working in concert just to absorb fat. So our stomach starts breaking down food in the process of digestion. Then our liver makes bile. Our gallbladder stores that bile. Our pancreas makes things like lipase and other enzymes that break down the food and break down the fat into digestible, absorbable products. And then that bile emulsifies the fatty acids, and your small intestine absorbs it. Okay, so you have 5 organs working in concert just to absorb fat. If fat weren't really, really important, it would not do this. It wouldn't have wasted its time and energy. This is a very high energy demand to keep these organs functioning in that process of absorbing fat. So if fat wasn't extremely important, it would not be, we would not be spending all this energy and coordination in order to absorb it. The other fact is that we cannot break down fiber. All herbivores that eat high fiber diets, they get actually most of their nutrition from the breakdown of that fiber. The bacteria in their guts actually feed on the fiber. There are no vertebrate animals that can break down fiber. So they have to cultivate these bacteria, which break down the fiber and actually eat the fiber. And that's what they get their nutrition from. And then they expel and excrete short chain fatty acids. That's a waste product of these bacteria. And that's what the animal absorbs. And these are 100% saturated fats. So even gorillas that just eat green leaves, they get about 70% of their calories from saturated fat. Cows get as much as 80% of their calories from saturated fat because they're much more efficient at breaking these things down. And then those bacteria break down and die off, and the animal absorbs those and gets the protein from those bacteria. And so that's actually what they are eating. We don't have that ability anymore. We've lost that millions of years ago. And this is evidenced by the fact that we have what's called an appendix, which in other primates and other animals who are hind gut digesters is actually a very, very long cecum. And that's where fiber will actually pack down into and break down into short chain fatty acids. So that's where they get the majority of their nutrition and their calories. We don't have that ability anymore. An appendix is a vestigial cecum. Vestigial meaning that millions of years ago, it used to be this large organ that could do this, but since we haven't used it in millions upon millions upon millions of years, it has shriveled up and gone away because your gut has a very high energy demand. And so if you're not using part of your intestine, it is really holding you back and wasting energy, which is death in the wild. So you can also look at this in as far as colon disease and diverticulosis. Diverticulosis has been shown to have only a few correlating events. So constipation, high fat diet, and meat diets and all these sorts of things have no association with diverticulosis. In fact, there's a study showing with thousands of patients and thousands of colonoscopies looking at what factors were associated with this. They found the only things that had even an association with diverticulosis, which is sort of the outpouching and breakdown of your distal colon. And this can get infected and have problems. You can die from this. You have to get part of your colon removed. You'll have to have a colostomy bag. And the only things that were associated with diverticulosis, which could then turn to diverticulitis, was increased fiber and increased number of bowel motions a day. All right. So the more fiber people ate, the more people defecated, the more likely they were to have colon disease and the breakdown and failure of their colon, because that's how I think about it. I think of this as organ failures, such as heart failure. Your heart is beating against a very high pressure gradient for years and decades on end, and eventually it just goes, that's it, I give up. And it starts to break apart and break down, and that's heart failure. Well, I look at diverticulosis as colon failure. You have overworked this organ, and it's just run out of life. It's just run out of miles, and it's just going to start falling apart now and not work as well as it would have otherwise. Even when people do get diverticulitis or appendicitis or cancer and anastomoses and other sorts of bowel issues, you will see general surgeons and colorectal surgeons putting people on what is called a low residue diet. Really, that's just a low fiber diet. And that's because they want to rest the bowel. And so they don't want the bowel working and expending all this effort and energy and pushing and squeezing and peristalsing to get rid of this stuff, right? Because they want the bowel to just heal and rest. So you don't want to overwork it. Okay, but everyone's saying that fiber is good for you, that peristalsis and moving and motion, all that stuff is really good for the bowel, and this is beneficial for you. So why, if that's true, then why do we, whenever there's a problem, rest the bowel and avoid fiber? And that helps the bowel. If fiber is going to help the bowel and it's good for the bowel, then it should be good in those circumstances as well. Okay, so that never really made sense to me, because you're causing harm in a harmed state. Why is that not causing a harm or overworking and overusing that organ in a non-pathological state? That never really made sense to me. So these people will say, don't eat fiber, but then when this is done, oh, you better eat fiber because that's what's going to protect you. That makes absolutely no sense. And the only reason people are saying this is just because they've been trained to say this their entire life, and they haven't actually thought about it. Okay. And also think about this. This is waste material. This is going out. It's being excreted. That means your body can't use it. That means your body didn't want it, and it wants to get it out. Okay. If fiber was so good for us, why is our body just pushing it out at all costs? It actually isn't good for us. It actually causes harm to us. It causes microabrasions in the gut lining, causes increased mucus secretion and inflammatory responses as well. It also blocks the absorption of nutrients in our small intestine, and makes it impossible for our body to absorb everything that we're eating. How is that beneficial? How is that evolutionarily selected? Why is it that if you're eating something and you're blocking your body from absorbing the nutrients, that this provides an advantage somehow? That doesn't make any sense either. So you have to think about these things on first principles. And when you start looking at like that in this direction, these things start becoming a little more obvious. Then you have IBD and IBD and irritable bowel disease, such as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. There are studies actually going back to the 1800s showing that if you put people on a pure red meat and water diet, that you actually reverse these and stop these processes from happening. Dr. J.H. Salisbury of the Salisbury steak has actually shown this, wrote a whole book about it. And even as recently as 1975, Dr. Vogelin, who's a gastroenterologist, also reiterated this and wrote a book called The Stone Age Diet, arguing that humans, yes, are carnivores. And if you eat as a carnivore, you will stop having gastrointestinal diseases such as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. More recently, because this has all been papered over, because everyone said that fat and cholesterol were bad. And so 100 years of medical literature and knowledge just gets thrown out the window and just completely ignored after that. But even more recently, there have been studies looking at elemental diets with IBD, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, and an elemental diet, meaning that they just take the specific macro and micronutrients that you need without any of the extra stuff that sometimes comes along with this. And they found that this was better for getting people out of an acute exasperation, a flare-up of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis than steroids were, like prednisolone or prednisone. And They also looked at fasting mimicking diet. A fasting mimicking diet is just a ketogenic diet. So you're just eliminating carbohydrates and getting your metabolism into the so-called fasting state, which, as anyone who's listened to me before knows that I completely disagree with. I think that is our primary metabolic state. And this would be another piece of evidence to suggest that, because on a fasting mimicking diet versus a carbohydrate with fiber diet, they found that people with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis stayed in remission on average 51 weeks, whereas on the carbohydrate and fiber diet, they stayed in remission on average 0 weeks. All right, that's not a lot of weeks. So this is already in the literature now. So you don't even need all the stuff going back 100 years, 120 years, 150 years, but it is there. All right. So anatomically, again, we spoke about teeth and how this is changing over millions and millions of years. People say that we have flat teeth because they just look flat in the front. They're not actually. They're bicuspid teeth. Flat teeth are like a millstone. They can slide against each other, and they can grind down fibrous plants into more easily digestible mush, and then you can swallow that and your body can break it down a little better. But we actually have bicuspid teeth. So if you bite down and clench your teeth and then try to move your jaw side to side, it doesn't move at all. That's because we don't have flat teeth. If we had flat teeth, we would be able to make that sliding mechanism. And that's what other animals with flat teeth are able to do, like horses and cows. And again, we have smaller teeth, smaller jaws, smaller muscles of mastication. If you look at the picture of the gorilla here, most of that head is actually these big temporalis muscles, big muscles of mastication. The skull of a gorilla actually has a huge crest going back, and that's where all the muscle is attached. So that's just a ball of muscle on its head right there. And you look at our shoulders. Our shoulders have a rotational capacity that allow us to throw things very hard and very fast, like rocks, like spears, like other weapons, or boomerangs to hunt animals and take them out and take them as food. Chimpanzees can't do that. Chimpanzee or bonobo is our closest relative, really, in the animal kingdom, and they don't have that capacity in their shoulders. And so while the average adult male can throw a baseball about 60 miles an hour, and obviously people that are trained up can do much faster than that, even the strongest, most adept chimpanzee is only going to be able to throw a baseball about 20 miles an hour. That's because they don't have that rotational capacity in their shoulders. We also have very different eyes to prey animals. This is something that we see very often in predator animals. They have these forward-facing eyes that give 3D vision, and you can focus in on your prey and you can hunt them down. And then generally prey animals, they have wider set eyes so that they can see in a much wider range, so that they can see animals creeping up on them. People do talk about color vision. They say, well, color vision is, this is to look at different colored fruits and see the differences in plants, and that's possible, but it doesn't really matter because we do come from an herbivorous past. We do know that. And we don't lose a genetic trait unless there's an evolutionary advantage to do so. So unless there was an advantage to lose that color vision, then there's no point in getting rid of it. That's why we can still move our jaws from side to side. That comes from that herbivorous past. But again, there wasn't any real advantage from not being able to move your jaw from side to side. So, it ended up sticking around. But there actually are some people that have developed color blindness, and even just red-green color blindness. Why is that an advantage? Well, it's an advantage because you can see better in low light, and you can actually see animals, the contrast between animals and plants a lot better. So it's actually really good for hunting. So this has provided an adaptive advantage for hunting. But at the same time, their color vision is good for other things, and so it could be that it just didn't completely overshadow the ongoing benefits of color vision as well. So evolutionarily, as I mentioned, about 8 million years ago, we broke off from other primates because we started eating meat, started eating more meat and more meat, and started having these genetic and physical adaptations, these phenotypical adaptations that we see in the fossil record. We started becoming more upright. We started becoming taller. We started having smaller and smaller teeth, smaller jaws, bigger brains. And we started using tools because we had to figure out how to take down animals that outclassed us by every physical metric, like a mastodon or even a deer. There aren't many people that can, wrestle down a deer and beat it to death with their hands. Maybe they exist, but these things are very big, strong, powerful animals with antlers. And so we had to figure something out. We had to figure out how to take them down. And that's where tools and tactics come in. The pound stones go back millions and millions of years. The first worked stone tool came in at around 3.3 million years ago. And those developed and became more sophisticated as the eons go on and go by. And these were used to kill and dismember animals, and they got more and more sophisticated. And that's something that Dr. Bill Schindler spoke about in his talks and in his book, Eat Like Human, and he had a great talk at KetoCon as well. It's just a shame that that wasn't recorded, but you can find his material on YouTube as well, and I'll be having him on the show soon also. So what happened, I think, that really drove us into that final stage of pure carnivorism was the Ice Age, or the initiation of the Ice Ages around 2.5 million years ago or so. Before that, there really wasn't these ice caps, these polar ice caps. Those didn't exist further back than about 2.5 million years ago. Then we came into an ice age, which we're still actually a part of. And these ice sheets came down, they killed off the plants, they killed off the animals that ate the plants and weren't able to survive during the ice times. And really only these big megafauna and big fuzzy, furry mammals like mastodons, giant sloths and things like that were able to survive during this period. And then the carnivores and predators that were preying on them, our ancestors being among them, or at least adapted enough to survive during that time because we were eating meat and because we were eating these animals, and became basically reliant on pure animal nutrition because there weren't the plants available. So our ancestors that went down that line and just went whole hog on the whole meat train, those are the ones that survived, and those are the ones that turned into modern day humans because of that evolutionary drive and necessity for animal source nutrition. We can also look at this from the fossil record and something called the stable isotope study. So stable nitrogen studies, they can find this in the bones of any animal, and you can see what that animal ate. And if basically it builds up throughout the food chain. So animals that just eat plants, they will get a certain amount of this stable nitrogen. And then animals that eat that animal, they'll have a concentration of that nitrogen, and so on. So as you go up the food chain, you get up to the top, like a fish that eats algae. There's a fish that eats that fish, a fish that eats that fish, and so on up the chain till you get to sharks and orca whales and things like that. And so you can see that these are top of the food chain apex predators. And we actually see that our ancestors and early humans and even early Homo sapiens and Neanderthal were apex predators. They had a higher carnivore rating than even lions, foxes, hyenas around at the same time in the same location. Okay, so this is because our ancestors were eating the lions and hyenas and foxes and wolves as well. We have done this, looked at done stable isotope analysis of the ancient Egyptians. So not everyone knows this, but there are actually more, it's thought to be that there are more mummies in Egypt than there are people currently alive in Egypt. This is because these were just the burial practices of ancient Egypt. It wasn't just the pharaohs and the wealthy that were mummified. Certainly, they're the only ones buried with a fortune in gold and trinkets, but everyone was buried this way. And so they looked at the stable isotope study, and they found that that during the agricultural revolution, post agricultural revolution, that they were actually heavily eating grains, and this actually affected their health. We can look at these and we actually see atherosclerotic plaques in their hearts. And this was first thought to be that the pharaohs and wealthy were the ones eating all of this, eating all the rich food, and they could afford meat and fat. And so obviously they were getting fatty arteries because they were eating fatty meat. But that actually isn't the case. When you look at the stable isotope studies, we find that the normal peasant class were eating the same amount or the same kind of food as the upper class, just probably maybe not as much access. So if there was a famine or something like that, they're the ones that are going to starve first. However, they were still eating the same thing, and you can even see from their statuary that this is not actually the peak of human health here. This is the statue of a man who has clear gynecomastia and a pot belly. Okay, so that already is showing this dysregulation of health and hormonal health in the population just eating grains. So they had the original grains that they may have had treated and fermented or sprouted or done different things than they do now to get a more less harmful product, and it was still causing all of these problems. So even then, without processed sugar and refined sweets and junk food, they were still getting sick, and they were still getting unwell and gynecomastia and obesity as well. So evolutionarily, again, we look at different studies that are just all over the map. There was a major study that was done out of the University of Tel Aviv in Israel from Professor Mickey Ben-Dor, who I will be interviewing next week, actually. This showed that humans have been hypercarnivorous, apex predators for at least 2 million years. So again, apex predators, top of the food chain. This is what that stable isotope study shows, is that we actually were top of the food chain. Apex predators don't graze. I've never seen a great white shark eat kelp for roughage. I've never seen a lion eat grass for the same reasons. This is not what apex predators do. This is not what top of the food chain animals do. They eat animals. They eat the animals below them on the food chain. And this is what the Israeli study showed as well from Mickey Ben-Dor, that not only with the stable isotope study, but by many, many, many different metrics, we show that humans have been carnivores, apex predators, hunters, not hunter-gatherers, hunters for at least 2 million years. And that coincides with the advent of these ice ages. And people say that, well, when the ice ages came down, well, people were still eating plants. They still had to do this. And you point out that, like, well, during the ice ages, there really weren't any fruits or vegetables available to people. And, because it's ice. And they argue, well, no, people just moved towards the equator when that happened. That's actually completely false. That is nowhere argued in any of the scientific literature. And in fact, it's very clear from the fossil record that as the ice shelves were moving down, people were moving up. Okay, probably because this is where their preferred prey was, which is like the mastodons and megafauna. So we can also look at the fossil record and look at what happened after the agricultural revolution. Paleoanthropologists can actually look at a fossil and a skull and teeth and actually tell you if a human skull was before or after the agricultural revolution. The teeth and jaws will only develop properly with proper nutrition. And so crooked teeth, small jaws, micrognathia, those are all a product of malnutrition. So not getting enough of the appropriate nutrients that we need will make it impossible for our bodies to develop properly. There are other things as well, mouth breathing, sucking your thumb, and using bottles and all that sort of stuff. They can actually change how your mouth develops. Chewing on actual food, this stimulates the development of your jaw as well. Um, so But looking at this just from a nutritional standpoint, you do need specific nutrients like vitamin K2, K1, calcium, vitamin D, and so on in order to make straight teeth. And this is published widely in dentistry journals today, that this is a phenomenon, that this is not a genetic issue. Crooked teeth are not a genetic problem. They are a nutritional problem. This is from not getting the proper nutrients. So when we look at the fossil record before the agricultural revolution, we actually see very wide jaws with straight teeth. All of their wisdom teeth are in, and comfortably so. Their jaws are big and straight and wide and pronounced. They're not these short, truncated, crowded jaws with crowded teeth. Why is it that now we like almost no one gets their wisdom teeth in, whereas a couple hundred years ago, most people did if they were getting proper nutrition. People say, oh, well, we're evolving away from that. I'm sorry, but it takes way longer to evolve than just a couple hundred years or even a couple generations, because just a generation or two ago, not getting your wisdom teeth in was actually less common than it is now, far less common than it is now. Now we look at height in the fossil record. Actually, people in prehistoric era were actually taller, and they had larger brain sizes. So the average brain size of Homo sapiens was 11% larger before the agricultural revolution than it is now. Neanderthal brains were actually larger than that, going back like 50,000 years. This is likely because, even before the agricultural revolution, maybe people did start having to be, add into the gathering part of the hunter-gatherers, because they weren't able to get sufficient nutrition, sufficient fat and calories from the animals that they were eating, because the megafauna was going extinct, and we had to look at other sources of nutrition potentially to help mitigate this. So before that, our brains were actually bigger, and people were actually taller. And there are areas where people were known to have been hunting mammoths, and we can date these and say like, okay, well, these guys were mammoth hunters, and we can see this by other metrics as well to show that that's what they were eating. And they found that some of these populations were on average 6'2" or even 6'4", and that's on average. The average height of an adult male in America is 5'8". In China, Mongolia, and elsewhere, it's like 5'6", somewhere it's 5'4". That's very, very short. And that's the average. So, half the population would be below that as well. Not so in the areas that had an abundance of meat to eat, like these big mastodon hunters, and on average about 6'2" or more. And so a lot of these people were much taller than that as well. The different tribes in Africa where they just eat meat, on average, these guys are 6'2", 6'3", 6'4". The average height of a population denotes the average health of a population. And while you may have, geographical, differences in population, and sort of, like you have the pygmies in Africa, they're at full height. Those guys are not that tall. However, you do have different populations, like in Asia. We have people that went through the forced famines of Mao Zedong and the other communist famines. Obviously, they had stunted growth, and you have all these elderly Chinese people that are very short, and then they come over to America and they have kids who are 6'4", because this is a nutritional issue. This is not just a genetic issue. And we look at brain size as well. Okay, so this is a chart of our brains growing, going back 10 million years, and it's slowly creeping up, slowly creeping up, slowly creeping up. And then you see it around 2.5 million years, all of a sudden this spike up. And that's because during that slow rise, we're eating more meat and more fat, and we were growing our brain because we're figuring out how to get better quality food. We're starting to figure out tools. And all of a sudden, when we're basically forced to go full carnivore because we don't have any other options with the ice ages, our brain development skyrockets, and it has this exponential growth right up until the end there, where you can see right there at the end, it all of a sudden has a sharp decline downwards. Okay, you cannot argue that that is a genetic change. Like that is something that happened in the environment. Like the genes don't happen that fast, so it's nearly a straight line when you look at it, in proportion at that small area, and then almost direct line downwards. Okay, so that is a sharp, sharp, sharp decline. And so something happened there. Something happened that it was not good for us. And if you actually look at that, that coincides with the advent of agriculture and plant-based nutrition becoming more prevalent. Not even as dominant as it is now, just more prevalent. Okay, before that we were carnivores. We were living as carnivores. Then we add in plants on a wide scale, bam, our brain size goes down. That's not good, right? So, that is a very clear piece of evidence that this is not the way we should be eating. So, anthropologically, looking at different populations around the world that have lived as carnivores and do survive as such and thrive. You have the Native Americans. They drove buffalo over the cliff. This is likely what our ancient mastodon hunters did as well. They, maybe used fire or other sorts of techniques to spook these animals to run over a cliff and crash and die at the bottom. And they would use stone tools to cut them up and dry them and make pemmican, basically, in order to preserve that meat and fat and nutrition throughout the rest of the year. And they would do that. They would have one big buffalo drop a year sometimes, and they would feed their entire family and community for an entire year. They were also very, very strong, very, very powerful, very, very uh, physically and mentally dominant people. Just because they didn't have technology, they didn't have the iPhone, does not mean that they weren't intelligent. It does not mean that they weren't more intelligent than we are now, and they likely were. When you have harder environments and situations to live in, it actually necessitates more intelligence and ingenuity. Now we have it pretty soft. We don't have to use our brain as much. We don't have to figure out how to survive. They did. And they actually, were quite a lot taller than they are now. There was Dr. Steve Finney has talked about this multiple times, but there was one example that he gave of these paintings of these Native Americans were very tall and slender with large heads. And they said that these guys were actually, and this was from the 1800s, early 1800s, and they would say that these guys were actually like 6'7", 6'8". And they're like, that's not possible. Look how big their heads are. They would have been like a beach ball. And no, in fact, they were. And there's a lot of documentation to show that. They actually came and met the great white father, Thomas Jefferson, who was president at the time. And Thomas Jefferson, who was like 6'2", he even commented like these guys were giants. They were massive with big old heads, and big old head means big old brain. So that was a commonly recorded thing. We even have documentation of sailors coming over to the New World, and they were very brave. Talk about Indian braves. They were very brave. They had no fear. They would just jump out into the ocean, swim out to the boat, climb up there and walk around, just look around, expecting people butt naked. They didn't have anything with them. And the captain actually wrote in his journal or whatever that subsequently became published that, these guys, without a stitch of clothing on them, were just physical specimens, and they were more beautiful just in their nakedness than than any English gentleman in their finest regalia. They said these people were just beautiful and beautifully built, and very tall, and very strong, and very muscular. And this is something that we see as a rule around the world in these carnivore populations of humans. Genghis Khan, this was an entire nation, a massive one, an entire empire that just ate carnivore. They ate horse meat. They drank horse blood. They would have some fermented milk products as well, and they dominated most of Asia and most of Europe. This is the largest contiguous empire that has ever existed, and they ran solely on a carnivorous diet, and that gave them extreme benefits and advantages to warfare and governing huge tracts of land. First and foremost, because they didn't need to eat 4 times a day. They didn't have to stop and cook and eat and have low energy all the time. They could go 5 days without eating. Then they would eat 10 pounds of horse meat in a go, and they'd be good for another 5 days. That actually routinely happened. Or they were on a ride and they're just going, and their horse would be bled. They would get some blood from the horse, and that would last them for the day or two, and their horse would make more blood, and they would just keep going. So this was a renewable resource as well, the blood of the horses, as well as the milk as well. And people talk about how agriculture was just the finest advent because this allowed us to have cities. Well, I'm sorry, we have the largest contiguous empire ever that existed on a carnivore diet, did not need agriculture, did not need farmland, did not need to grow crops and grains. And they had the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed. The only thing that eclipsed it as far as landmass is concerned was the British Empire more recently, but that was a naval power. That was scattered all over the world. This was one huge chunk of the world, and what is now Russia is really some of the remnants of the Mongol Empire. But look at a map sometime and just Google that and see just how big this empire was, and then see for yourself if you believe the whole idea that you had to have grains and agriculture to have a civilization or cities. The Native Americans did the same thing. There was a city that was found abandoned because of 95% of the Native Americans died off through diseases brought over from Europe accidentally in the early 1600s. And they found this city in what is now St. Louis that had buildings and structures that were estimated to be able to house 1 million full-time residents. And they had trade routes going off in 5 major directions all across the continent in order to bring in food and trade and goods and so forth. So right there was a city, a million people in it. That's the population size of ancient Rome as well. So it can be done. Then you have the Inuits, these and other populations that live up in the Arctic Circle. There's no plans to access, even if they wanted to, which they actually don't. There was a chronicle or journal of a New England settler and explorer that spoke about this, where a couple months out of the year in the more southern reaches of Canada, it was such that it would thaw out. And they said that, okay, I understand that, during the winters, they're very harsh. There are no plants, you can't cultivate anything. And so you have to just eat meat. But, in the, 2-3 months of the thaw, surely they can live off the bounty of the land, which is how he phrased it, which I thought was great. And he said, but they did not do that. What they did was they ate meat, even in those times that they could have grown crops. Now, people say, well, they would have ate berries and did this, that, and the other. Especially when you go up further north, there really weren't berries accessible. And the ones that were these little lingonberries that are extremely sour. And in fact, most of them didn't like them. They didn't want to eat them. So, the gathering part of that hunter-gatherer motif was at most 2 months out of the year for things that no one really ate, like lingonberries. You have the Maasai in Africa and many other populations and tribes out there as well. They still just eat meat. Look at these guys. They're tall, they're slender, they're strong. There were studies back in the 1980s looking at the Maasai and saying like these guys are just built like Olympic athletes. They can just run forever. They never get tired. They never run out of energy. They just go, go, go. And they found that they thought that this must be because of the amount of exercise they did, because this was right when people were saying that fat and cholesterol killed you, made you fat and horrible and sick. And yet these guys were eating a lot of fat. They were drinking blood, drinking fatty milk, which is the milk of their livestock is about 8% milk fat, whereas ours is about 3.5 to 4% from cow's milk. So these guys were extremely healthy and extremely fit. And so they said, well, it must be because of their exercise level. They're just out there. They're out there being fit. And so they did a study and looked, and they found that, well, actually, no, not really. That on average, their daily exercise and energy expenditure, through athletic endeavors was 1.6 times that of the average American, which was, always said to be very sedentary, very slothful, bunch of couch potatoes, and with belly fat and no cardiovascular health. So that sort of throws that theory out the window as well. The native Australian Aboriginals, so much documentation about how these guys were hunters exclusively. They knew which plants that they could eat if they had to, but they didn't unless they had to or to use medicinally. They were hunters. They hunted kangaroo and other animals, and they exclusively ate meat. And they were very healthy. They're very tall. They actually had very, very tall, slender builds, just like the Maasai, very muscular and trim. And now that is not the case. So remember, I was talking about these human diseases those were really called the diseases of the West uh, previously. So previously, diseases of the West were things like obesity and diabetes, heart disease, all these sorts of things. Heart disease really wasn't described until the 1900s, but people getting these sorts of disease and getting sick, they only saw these in Western populations. And I remember learning as a kid that when eating a Western diet, Native Americans were 4 times as likely to get all the Western diseases, chronic diseases that we get today, like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, obesity as well. And I remember thinking at the time, well, doesn't that mean that the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get it at a lower rate. And what is a Western diet versus a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? They didn't say it at the time, but later learned that they were eating just a pure carnivore diet, maybe some plants sometimes if they had to, maybe, but generally they didn't. The vast majority of what they ate was just meat. And the Australian Aboriginals were no different. And in fact, when I first came to Australia to practice medicine, I learned right away that uh, basically the health of the Australian Aboriginals was quite poor. And I was told that whenever treating an Aboriginal patient, that whatever their age said on their chart, just to add 20 years to that, because that is just how quickly they aged. And so if you had someone who's 45, you basically consider the diseases that someone would get in a 65-year-old, because that is just what you generally see. And so if you're seeing like a range of diseases or cancers in this from 60 to 70 or 60 to 80, you can actually look at that from 40 to 60 in the Aboriginal population. So that is seriously affecting them. And that is because they didn't have exposure to the agricultural revolution like European populations did, and others around Asia and India as well, and Northern Africa in certain parts. So these people are going to be much more affected by the plant toxins that exist to defend these plants against predation, and they are going to become more hurt. And this again goes back to the fact that these are not diseases. This is a poison dose relationship. When you remove this substance, these diseases go away. That is a toxic relationship. That is not a disease relationship. Okay. So you can even go further back and you look at Herodotus, and this is a story that I've told before, but I think it's very, very interesting. Herodotus was the father of history. He's the first person that started chronicling things down and giving us a historical record. He went all over the world and chronicled very important things, and that's the only reason we have records of a lot of these things and these wars and these meetings between different dignitaries of different countries. One of them was between a diplomat from the Persian Empire who went down to Ethiopia after Persia had taken over Egypt. And they were, talking, getting to know their new neighbors. And the king of Ethiopia asked the Persian emissary, what do your people eat and how long do your people normally live? And so the Persian guy described growing crops and making bread out of wheat. And they said that our people would normally live around 70 years. And the king of Ethiopia sort of laughed at him and said, well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt. We exclusively eat boiled meat from our livestock, and we only drink the milk from our livestock. And our people would live 120 years and sometimes more. And that might sound a bit far-fetched. And in fact, in the Australian Aboriginals and the Inuits and Maasai and Native Americans and other such cultures that just ate meat, they actually talk about this longevity. And Dr. Salisbury, chronicles that in his book in the 1800s. He lived with the Native Americans. They said these people were hale and hearty, running around with a pack on their back, following the buffalo herds day in and day out at 105, 110, 115 years old. They're not sitting in a nursing home turning to dust for 40 years. They're active adults in good health. All of this sounds very far-fetched to modern day people who start breaking down in their 30s and just start dying and getting obese and heart disease and other sort of issues very early on in life. But we've actually known for about 20 years now as geneticists that chromosomally humans are designed to live about 120 years on average, meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 years without doing anything special. Okay, so why are we dying in our 60s and 70s on average? Right? That is literally middle-aged. And yet this is the common theme around the world, is that our bodies just start breaking down after 30. They really start breaking down after 40. And then you get into your older age in your 50s, and we call this a senior citizen. We get senior citizen discounts at 55 in some places. That's less than middle age. That should be in the prime of your adulthood, and yet it's not. And yet we're breaking down and getting more and more sick unless you don't eat things that cause harm. Metabolically, we talk about in biochemistry a fed state versus a fasting state. So a fed state traditionally would mean if you eat, this is what your biochemistry looks like, and then you stop eating and your biochemistry switches into a different program in order to keep you alive and maintain things while you don't have any incoming food. I think that that's completely wrong. I think that our so-called fasting state is actually our primary metabolic state. This is the primary metabolic state of all animals in the wild, basically all animals in the wild. And we have studies on this going to 1980, 81 with wolves. And they said, well, you have to eat carbs, burn carbs was the thought. And so they said, okay, but wolves don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. Do they have blood sugar? Do they have muscle and liver glycogen? They found out, yes, they actually do. And it's rock solid. It does not change. No matter what they're doing, it's basically the same. There's subtle variations, but they are in this so-called fasted state. And that allows their body to mobilize energy and nutrition from their fat stores. And that's our primary metabolic state as well. When you eat carbohydrates, it raises your insulin. Insulin basically shuts down your metabolism, and it slows your metabolism. Your basal metabolic rate drops on average by 300 kilocalories a day. So on average, you will burn 300 less kilocalories, food calories a day when eating carbohydrate containing food. So if you have 2,000 calories and with carbs in the mix and 2,000 calories without carbs in the mix, you will burn 300 more food calories a day without the carbs. And so, this whole calorie in, calorie out thing gets a bit more complicated because it's not as simple as people think, because what you eat determines what your output will be, what your metabolic rate will be. And so it's not as easy to figure out exactly what your metabolic rate is. It's not as easy to figure out exactly how much energy your body's producing. These are also complex organic chemicals. They obviously have complex organic chemical interactions with your body. So, a carbohydrate is a lot more than a calorie, as are proteins, as are fats. There are many different kinds of fats. There are many different kinds of carbohydrate. There are many different kinds of proteins. And these have different chemical effects in your body. They do different things in your body. They're used for different things in your body. And so you cannot just look at them as a caloric source, because that is not what they are. They fundamentally change your body. And insulin, especially, is problematic because it will, again, slow your metabolism. It stops energy from going, it stops energy from coming out of your cells. So it forces energy into cells. It stops energy from coming out of cells. It blocks proteolysis. It blocks lipolysis. And so without lipolysis, you cannot break down your fat stores to make energy, to go through gluconeogenesis and make blood sugar and glycogen, and to make ketones to run your body and your brain. So you shut down that whole process. But it also does something more insidious, which it blocks a hormone called leptin, which is secreted from your fat stores and tells your brain how much energy you have. And it's like a running gas gauge on how much energy your body has. And so your brain looks at that and goes, oh, we got plenty of energy. We don't need to eat. Or it gets blocked by insulin and fructose, by the way. And now your brain can't see its leptin. It thinks you're starving to death. And now your blood sugar is dropping because your insulin's up, which forces your blood sugar to go down. And your brain sends out a panic signal that says, if you don't eat now, you will die. And so this is why multiple times a day, people think that they're dying and they need to eat constant amounts of food. And so this is just a depiction of that leptin insulin cycle, and that gets disrupted by carbohydrates. So when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar necessarily goes up. Well, this is not a good thing. People think this, oh, I'm getting more energy. That helps me. No, it doesn't actually. High blood sugar is actually damaging to your body. This is because glucose molecules can physically fuse to other molecules and damage them and make them act abnormally, pathologically, or just not at all. It's called glycation. Fructose is actually worse than this. It does more of this in your body. So in a defensive mechanism, your insulin goes up, right? Because this high blood sugar, chronic high blood sugar, is actually what kills diabetics, is what breaks them down. This is, again, that toxicity model in full view, where you're eating something and this is damaging your body. Okay. And we've had, I think, over 100 years of scientific literature showing that a ketogenic diet is very efficacious for treating diabetics. Okay. So again, this is a poison relationship. You're removing carbohydrates, you're removing sugar, you're removing alcohol, you're removing the precipitous factors that cause these diseases like diabetes. Cancer is another major one. So Otto Warburg described in the 1930s and 40s, and he actually won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his work in cancer biology, that cancer cells feed on glucose. In fact, they need about 400 times the amount of glucose that normal cells do. And this is because their mitochondria are damaged. Otto Warburg showed that if you have healthy mitochondria, you cannot get cancer. All right. And this is something that's been reiterated and actually proven true by the work of such people as Professor Thomas Seyfried of Boston College, who I've had on my podcast as well, who I encourage everyone to go look at his stuff, because and he wrote a book called Cancer is a Metabolic Disease. It is. If you look at the cancer biology, and this is in textbooks. This is not fringe. This is not a fringe opinion. This is hard biochemistry. If your mitochondria work properly, they stay in oxidative phosphorylation, okay? And that uses oxygen to make an abundant amount of ATP. When your mitochondria get damaged, they stop being able to do that, and they go into a fermentative process. And so it actually takes a lot more glucose to make ATP, because you're getting 36 ATP from aerobic oxidative phosphorylation, but you're only getting 2 when you're doing anaerobically. And so then this produces lactate as well, which is that sort of that burning in your muscles when you're working out, that sort of burn, the feel the burn, that's that lactic acid buildup that actually hurts. And so cancer cells produce a lot of lactate, and this actually sort of makes it sort of a swamp around them that makes it hard for other cells to get in close and try to attack them. Okay, so this is something too that Professor Seifried has shown that if you go onto a ketogenic diet, this actually starves out your cancer cells. It limits the supply of glucose to those cancer cells, which again need 400 times the amount of glucose that other cells do because they're much less efficient at making it, and they're trying to grow just out of control. And the reason they're trying to grow out of control, by the way, is because the mitochondria are actually what regulate cell growth. And so when the mitochondria get damaged and they can't do their job, they can't control growth. And so we get out of control growth, which is what cancer is. All right. So when you go on a ketogenic diet, you will limit the amount of energy that those cells have. You will also help the health of the mitochondria. Maybe it's too late for some of the mitochondria in your cancer cells. However, the rest of your mitochondria will be benefited by this. There are multiple studies showing that the respiration rate and efficacy of and health of the mitochondria in your cells when on a ketogenic diet, when in ketosis, is 4 times that of normal people on a carbohydrate inclusive diet. And you actually find that you get more mitochondria as well. So in people in ketosis, will actually have 4 times the amount of mitochondria. So they're 4 times as effective, and they're 4 times as plentiful. And so this is very beneficial just for overall health, but also in the context of preventing, certainly, and possibly even fighting cancer. And this is something that's actually been picked up by other medical groups, such as Paleomedicina in Hungary, which have been using at least a ketogenic, if not a carnivore diet for people for like well over 10 years with cancer, with Crohn's, with other metabolic diseases, and they're having fantastic results. But this is becoming even this is becoming recognized in America as well. And even Cedars-Sinai has started instituting metabolic treatments for cancer as well, which includes nutritional ketosis as a driving force in that treatment. And again, going back to the fact that this all stems from plants being toxic and plants trying to kill you. The reason I say plants are trying to kill you, it's not that they're necessarily out to get you per se. I don't think they really care one way or the other if you're around, unless they want you to go down and become fertilizer for them. But this all stems from when I was taking cancer biology 22 years ago at the University of Washington in Seattle. And we learned day one how toxic plants were. And this is something that actually we learned before that. And I remember in 7th grade biology, we learned that plants and animals were in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals could eat them so they could survive and thrive. Otherwise, they go extinct. And then animals who eat plants, eating a specific plant, becoming more and more adapted to that specific plant and co-evolving with that plant to become more resistant and be able to break down those poisons into safe byproducts so that they can survive and thrive. And so if you're not in that evolutionary arms race, you're going to start losing, right? Because you're not going to have those built-in defenses against these poisons. And we were looking at this from a cancer perspective, and we were taught that just Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens in them, and mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it. They all had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens in them. And they were quite abundant. We know from the work of Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley. In 1989, he published a paper that actually compared the plant toxins already existing in the vegetables that we eat, comparing them to the pesticides we spray on them. Because we say, oh, well, if you grow it in your own garden, then it's okay. Oh, I gotta get away from these pesticides. No. It's the plant that was the problem in the first place. And they were saying this in the 80s too. We got to get rid of these pesticides. We got to get rid of them. So he sort of did a study and said, okay, well, what are we looking at here? And he found that there were 42 different poisons identified in these plants, 20 of which were shown to be carcinogenic in the lab. And obviously we found many, many more just in the 12 years that in between when I took cancer biology and learned all this. But back in 89, they found that of those 42 chemicals, they were 10,000 times more abundant by weight than the pesticides we sprayed on these plants. Okay. So the spinach was worse than the pesticides, right? It was 10,000 times more abundant. And the naturally occurring poisons were orders of magnitude times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we spread on them. This is why we still have pesticides. This is why they weren't outlawed and banned, because they showed scientifically that the plant is worse than the pesticide. And so if you're going to eat the plant, you probably don't need to worry about the pesticide. Now, that's not to say that pesticides are good for you, especially things like Roundup and all these other sorts of things. No, they are not. But the plants aren't either. That's the whole point. And so we were quite taken aback by this, as you could imagine. And I thought that he must be joking. Everyone thought he must be joking. Everyone was just looking around, thrashing their heads around wildly, looking for a TA, like, cackling in the corner, trying to keep it together, because this was obviously a joke. It was not a joke. He was not joking. And it finally dawned on us. And I remember thinking, like, okay, he's serious, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he, must have just read our minds, because he looked at us and just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I said, right, screw plants. And I just stopped eating plants from that day on. That's why I've been doing carnivore inadvertently for about 22 years now, because I learned that plants were toxic. They don't want you to eat them. If you start eating them, they are going to make it hard on you, and they're going to make you feel like crap, and they're going to try to kill you. We know this intuitively. If you get lost in the woods, you can't just eat any random plant. Most plants will kill you, or at least make you very, very sick. Okay. So these are inedible plants, right? So why do we think that the so-called edible plants are just from the Garden of Eden and just couldn't be better for you? In fact, they're not. They're actually quite harmful as well. It's just they're not as harmful as, say, hemlock. Okay. So let's look at some of these things. There are a lot of different toxins that exist in these. These are things like cassava, which are the third most, as a caloric source, is a third most important caloric source in the third world. You have almonds, which contain cyanide. There are 2,500 different cyanide-containing plants that we know of, and they go by crush receptors, or crush response. So they don't just exist free floating in the seed or the nut, but when they're crushed, then the cyanide is released, right? Well, what is crushing? That's something chewing and masticating that thing. And the plant goes, right, you're going to eat me. I'm going to poison you. So it releases this poison pill, and it says, I'm going to take you down with me. And you look at that pit, that's like a peach pit. When you open that up, you crack that stone open. It looks sort of like a shriveled almond. It's actually called a bitter almond. And this has enough cyanide in it that when chewed to release the cyanide, one or two of those can kill you. Okay. Almonds, it takes around a pound or two, depending on the almonds, because they have varying amounts of cyanide in them, a pound or two of almonds to get a lethal dose of cyanide. Okay. I have sat down and just, handballed half a pound of almonds from a Costco bag of these things before, while watching TV. That's potentially half a lethal dose. I'm a bigger person, so maybe it wasn't enough, it wasn't half of a lethal dose for me, but that is absolutely terrifying. We just sell this in stores where kids can get them, because like that is insane. And while you may not get dead from eating these amounts of cyanide, they can actually cause a lot of harm to your body. It can cause damage to your thyroid, damage to your brain as well. They're neurotoxic. So look at some of these in specificity. Look at hormone disruptors. There are things like called phytoestrogens. These are very commonly produced throughout the plant kingdom. Most notably in soy. About 3 ounces of soy have over 1 million nanograms of phytoestrogens in them. Put that in comparison to a fertile woman who makes about 180,000 nanograms a day, right? So it's 10 times what they would make in a day just in those 3 ounces. The birth control pill, depending on the birth control pill, would have about 35,000 nanograms of estrogen. Then they say, like, oh, well, what about beef? Beef, this hormone tree that have all these hormones in them. Right. Three ounces of lean beef that is hormone treated, given growth hormone supplementation throughout their life, has about 4 nanograms of estrogen in it. So Not the same thing, not on the same scale whatsoever. There are other things that increase testosterone, but also things that block and suppress testosterone, block and suppress estrogen. Even just carbohydrates will suppress the conversion of testosterone into estrogen in women. Women don't just make estrogen, they actually make testosterone first. And then that testosterone is converted into estrogen in the ovaries. But high insulin levels will actually block that conversion. So just that high insulin is actually causing harm throughout your body. It's blocking leptin, it's blocking conversion of your hormones, it's doing a lot of damage throughout your body. So that's again another way that we can tell that that's not our normal biochemical state because we're actually screwing up our biochemistry. So this is where like PCOS comes into play when women are eating a lot of carbohydrates. Some will be more sensitive than others. However, for all of them, when they're eating carbohydrates, their insulin will go up. That will block the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. And so they will necessarily have more testosterone than their body wants, and they'll have less estrogen than their body wants or needs. And so this disrupts our hormones quite significantly. And there are other factors that do that as well. Then you have nutrient blockers. These are uh, different substrates and substances that block absorption or digestion. We already talked about fiber, how that makes a physical barrier between your enzymes and the food. So it can't break down the food into amino acids in the first place, or into short chain fat, or into shorter portioned out fatty acids. And then once those things are broken down, this is a physical barrier from those nutrients getting to the border of your intestine to be drawn into the cell in the first place. So those get blocked and taken out. But more specifically, in things like multiple different things, but just looking at soy and wheat, they make a protease inhibitor. Protease is released from your pancreas to break down protein, as it sounds. Something like ASE, that means it's breaking something down. So protein breaker or downer. And then protease inhibitor stops that. Okay. So soy and wheat have protease inhibitors that block protease from breaking down our protein. Okay. This gets into bioavailability of plants as well. The protein that's available in, or that exists in plants, are not available necessarily. Gluten makes up 80% of the protein in wheat. Gluten cannot be used as protein. Your body cannot break it down. It cannot absorb it. It cannot use it as protein, period. And it has protease inhibitors. So what little is left of the protein in wheat that your body can actually do anything with, now your body can't do anything with it because it's blocking the breakdown of it. But also, if you are eating meat with this very bioavailable proteins and fats, when you're eating it with wheat, like in a sandwich, where you put some croutons or something, or bread chicken, well, what you're doing there is you're going to block protease from breaking down the meat as well. And so you're actually going to, again, waste nutrients, waste nutrition, and that cannot be beneficial to our survival. So that cannot be what we're supposed to eat. Soy does the same thing. Soy has protease inhibitors as well. And there are many, many others, and many other examples of these nutrient blockers. Photosensitivity, this is one that not many people know about, but there are many plants that actually cause us to be much more sensitive to sunlight, and others that just increase inflammation, increase damage. So we get some damage from sun, and that increases that inflammatory response and damage. So our sunburns are worse, they hurt worse, they damage our DNA worse, and so we get worse peeling and at higher risk for skin cancers and things like that. But specifically, the things that cause you to be much more sensitive to UV light are things like limes. So there's oils in limes. And now remember, a lime is an unripe fruit. Now, the plant may or may not want you to eat that fruit. Mostly it wants other animals to eat that fruit. Most fruit will kill you. Most berries will kill you. But there are some that may not be as toxic or contain fructose, and that they generally have much less defense chemicals in them. And that's why we find fructose to be sweet. because we recognize that as safe. And so we say, okay, this can give me a quick hit of energy and that will make me survive. But, fructose in and of itself will cause a lot of harm. In fact, is known to break down into alcohol and cause the same damages as alcohol, which is something that I talk about in many episodes as well. So limes being an unripe fruit, its seed is not ready to be eaten. It has defenses. It has defense chemicals. This is where green tomatoes come from. These are traditionally known to be toxic, and you don't eat them. You want them to be vine ripened. In a lime, it secretes oils on the outside. Then if you touch them, if you handle them, they will soak into your skin and it cause you to be very, very sensitive to sunlight. And there's actually documented cases of people getting second-degree burns just from handling limes in the sun. That actually happened to my younger brother when we were kids in Southern California. We had a lime tree and he was out there sort of picking limes and playing around. And all of a sudden he came in, he had these massive red welts and wheals all over his body. And we thought that, he must be having a sensitizing reaction, and the next time he would get anaphylaxis and he'd be dead. And so I was like, okay, keep that kid away from limes and lime trees. That wasn't the case, that he has eaten and used limes since then, and hasn't had any sort of problem. So that is really, looking back, likely what happened. There are other things that will also do the same. There's a thing called celery dermatitis, where people who handle a lot of celery, pick celery, eat a lot of celery, will get very, very sensitive to light. They'll have to wear hats and long sleeve shirts and even gloves and put sun cream on everywhere because they will just get absolutely scorched in the sun. And so this also goes into why we generally don't see too many tan vegans. A lot of them will get burned and torn up, and I do fine. I don't get burnt in the sun. You talk to any carnivore who's been doing this for a while, they're amazed. They don't get burns in the sun. You might get red. That's just blood going to the skin, but that just turns into a tan later. You're not really going to peel or damage your skin unless you really overdo it. And again, we talked about the cyanogenic properties of different plants. And again, there's 2,500 different plants that use cyanide as a defense. And so this is very clearly designed to stop animals from eating them because it has that crush effect. They only release the cyanide when they are crushed. Okay. And you have nightshades. These are potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. These have been known for thousands of years to be just an entire class of plant that you just don't go near. The Europeans in going back millennia knew that you don't touch nightshades, and they could tell when they went to the New World. They say, "Oh, yeah, these are nightshades. Don't eat them." They brought them back as curiosities. What a strange looking plant! Look we brought back from this strange new land, and it was seen that some of the natives were eating these things, but they were doing it in very specific ways. They were taking the tomatoes, they were blanching them, they were taking the peel off, they were taking the seeds out, and they were only eating the pulp. And that's actually what traditional, tomato sauces were made out of, was just that pulp of vine ripened tomatoes. They would peel the skin of a potato. Up until very recently, it's only been within my lifetime that people said, no, 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 you don't want to peel these plants and these vegetables. That's where all the nutrients are. That's where all the vitamins are. Yeah, okay. It's also where all the poison is. That's their barrier protection that stops insects from eating into them and eating this part of the plant that they don't want eaten. Okay. And gluten, again, this is a protein, but it is not possible to use as protein. But it also causes a lot of harm. It actually causes leaky gut, which is the breakdown of those tight junctions in between your intestinal cells and the intestinal wall. And this allows chemicals such as lectins and other things, even bacteria, getting into your system and getting into your body when normally they would not do that. They would stay out by that barrier protection, just like your skin stops, bugs and weird things from getting into your body. Your gut lining does the same thing. So really the lumen of your intestine, that's the outside world, really. Your body's not letting that in unless you're eating things like gluten, and that breaks down that barrier protection. So now these things can get into your body and cause harm. is where lectins come in. Lectins, I mean, there's a whole book written about this in 2019 by Dr. Gundry, who showed just how harmful lectins are. Things like kidney beans, which are very normal things to eat. When you don't process them properly, when you don't soak them in water and then boil them for at least 10 minutes, those lectins can make you very sick, very, very sick. And even then, they're not perfectly done away with. They're not perfectly disabled. They still cause harm in your body. And of course, heat treatment isn't going to take care of all the plant toxins out there. But lectins specifically will get into your body through these tight junctions. They've actually been indicated to be a causative factor in autoimmune issues because the body makes antibodies towards these lectins because these are foreign molecules. Your body does not want them in your body. And so it fights them, makes these antibodies to go out and attack these things. Well, there's something called molecular mimicry where some protein or something on one of your cells may be similar enough to one of these lectins or a bacteria or a virus that your body's fighting off that these antibodies stick to them because they don't have a mind of their own. They're just acting chemically. And if they can bind to something chemically, they will bind to that something chemically. It's just a chemical reaction. And so by molecular mimicry, all of a sudden your body has started attacking your own body. That's an autoimmune disease. Okay. So an autoimmune, your body is attacking itself, but it's not attacking itself. It's attacking these lectins. And when you remove those lectins from your diet, your body stops making antibodies towards those lectins. And then there's no spillover effect from those antibodies to your body. And this is why nearly every single autoimmune disease that I've ever seen when on a carnivore diet will significantly improve, if not completely resolve within a few months. I have yet to see someone with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis go on a carnivore diet, pure meat and water diet, usually red meat and water diet, and not completely reverse their disease within 3 months on biopsy. So when these guys get biopsied at 3 months, there's no sign of disease. I have yet to see a single case that didn't happen. Rheumatoid arthritis as well, that just goes away. And then people will get much better within the first few weeks as well. And then even, on biopsy, they'll find that there's no sign of disease after a few months. Hashimoto's takes a little bit longer. I usually see that take about, 9 months to a year, or maybe just still lingering on a little bit. But again, it significantly improves, and we've had, again, with Dr. Salisbury, he was showing that you could reverse rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis back in the 1800s by putting people on a pure red meat and water diet. This was something that was well known and documented in the medical peer-reviewed medical literature going back to the 1800s, and yet no one knows about it. Why is that? And then there are other things that'll just kill you straight out. We talk about the inedible plants like North American water hemlock. This blocks the GABA receptors in your brain that basically calm down your brain cells. When your brain cells get too stimulated and overstimulated and out of control, they all start firing at once, and this is called a seizure. Okay, they can be quite dangerous. They actually damage your brain directly. They can make you fall over and crack your head. If you don't stop having a seizure, you can die, or you will die if you don't stop. Hemlock blocks the GABA receptor. So all the medications that we use to stop the seizures, they basically all work on that GABA receptor. And so this is blocking that. And so it doesn't matter how much medication and drugs you give these people, they're going to die of seizures within 1 to 2 minutes. And you're never going to get to them fast enough to stop it anyway, even if it does have some effect. So this is a very well-developed, cataloged and described phenomenon in botany, going back thousands of years, that plants use harmful chemicals to stop animals and insects from eating them. Okay, so, in summary, this really shows that we are obligate carnivores, okay, with one optimal diet. All right. So we are obligated to eat meat. We cannot thrive and survive on anything else. Okay. So while we can survive eating other things, we're not going to thrive. That's not going to be optimal for us. I know some people say that, well, everyone's different, and maybe one person does better with an omnivore diet, maybe someone does better with a vegetarian diet, maybe someone does better with a meat-based diet. Everyone's different. That is nonsense. That is someone who has not thought about this for literally 1 second. Okay. And when I hear doctors say this sort of thing, I really, really get a bit miffed, because these are people that are supposedly biologists, but I guess everyone forgot their biology lesson, and forgot to actually just look out in nature. And anytime someone says this, I've asked doctors this, I've asked other people this that have made this ridiculous comment. I said, name one example of two members of the same species who have different optimal diets. Okay. It does not exist. People say, well, is this good for women as well as men? What about during pregnancy? What about kids? The answer is just yes. It doesn't matter what condition you are, what stage of life you are, whatever. We are humans. We are Homo sapiens sapiens. Okay. If we had a different optimal diet between two people, those two people would be different species of people. And yet they're not. We don't have different species of people anymore. We don't even have Homo neanderthalis anymore. We just have Homo sapiens, and Neanderthals were carnivore as well. So you have to be actually quite divergent. You can't even be a close relative and have a very different diet. All right. So, biologically, anatomically, evolutionarily, anthropologically, metabolically, we can show that humans are carnivores. That is just the kind of animal that we are, and that eating meat is our optimal diet. And for no less reason than plants use defense chemicals because they don't want to die. And if it's you or them, they will make sure it's you, okay? Because it's kill or be killed out in the wild, even for plants as well as animals. And I've never seen a cave painting of a salad either. All right. So I hope you guys like that talk. Have some of my references here that people can take a look at, and I'll try to put these in the show notes as well. And there's obviously more also. So I hope you guys like that. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe button. It really does help. Make a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you'd like to see different. Tell me the sorts of things you'd like to see in the future, and I'll try to make that happen for you. All right. Thanks, guys. Okay. Well, I hope you liked it. That was the presentation. It wasn't maybe as polished and smooth as what I did at KetoCon, but I tried to add in a few more things that didn't get in the KetoCon talk as well. So anyway, hope you guys liked it. See you later.